ado, let me introduce our governor of the state of Connecticut, Dannel Malloy. Hello, everybody. I'm going to try to get through this little presentation just to set the stage. Try to do it a little bit more rapidly than I did the other day. It took me about 20 minutes. I think I can get this down to about 10. The rest of the time is set aside to take questions and try to answer those to the greatest extent. I am pleased that the mayor was kind enough to be here, and want to thank him for the introduction. And I want to thank all of the dignitaries, and most especially the greatest lieutenant governor you could possibly have, and Nancy Wyman. I don't know when the last time a governor came to your town to talk to you was, but I'm here to talk about important matters. I was elected in early November, and on November 15th, a budget was handed to me by the outgoing governor. It represented a budget that was $3.5 billion out of budget, a structural deficit of $3.5 billion. And what that meant was that all of the federal stimulus money was used and gone. All of the surplus dollars, namely $1.5 billion in round numbers, that had existed had been completely drawn down. Obviously we were still running a deficit. And it also meant that the $647 million in borrowing to cover operating expenses was not built into that budget, nor will borrowing be built into this budget to cover for operating expenses, because it's not the appropriate thing to do. Our choices were to do more of the same of what's been done in the past, and that is to play the same games that have been played in the past, to deploy the same gimmicks that have been deployed in the past. I could have suggested a budget that was $3.5 billion out of alignment and refused to admit it for 6 months, and then try to cobble together votes on a budget at the last minute. I reject that because it's bad public policy. It leads to instability in our state, and as happened last time, it also leads to large tax increases without structural changes. And this budget is very much about structural changes. Or we could have done it the old-fashioned way, which was more of the same with those gimmicks, or we could change and change the way we do business and make some tough choices and understand that there are no easy answers. We could make it with a combination of spending cuts, with restructuring government, and savings from employees, and ultimately increased revenue. Ultimately, we came forward with a budgetary framework. Budgetary framework that this budget was developed under, and a framework that was announced 4 weeks, or close to 4 weeks before we rolled out the budget, consists of the following. No new base spending in the general fund. No borrowing money to cover operating expenses, as was done in the past. Fully funding our pension obligations to the tune of $877 million per fiscal year. By the way, one of the gimmicks that had been played in the past was to not fund those benefits. It's also one of the reasons that our pensions are at 52% funding, one of the 5 worst in the nation. And no early retirement programs would be built into the budget, in essence incentivizing people to retire a year or 2 early who would retire anyway in the appropriate period of time. That was our budgetary framework. So this is what we did within that framework in the closing weeks of our budget deliberations. We came forward with a budget that has close to $800 million in cuts from the projected budget that was handed to me by Governor Rell on November 15th. We are restructuring the state of Connecticut's government, specifically going from 81 directly funded agencies to 57, a reduction of 30% towards my ultimate goal of 33%, and by the way, we're going to largely surpass that in the coming year as we look to restructure, consolidate, and remove redundancies and silos within the system. We identified savings, specifically a goal that we thought was reachable with respect to our employee base of $1 billion a year, so approximately $1.8 billion in cuts. And only then, and after we had done all that, did we look at the revenue side of what needed to be done. In this budget, before we talk about the revenue, we fully fund education, including the $271 million hole that was left in the ECS funding. Now let me explain that to you. We have educational cost-sharing funding to every municipality. Some get more than others. In Torrington, you get a larger share than many communities of your total educational expenditures from the ECS formula. However, in the budget deal that was struck 2 years ago, there had been a cut in that funding of $271 million. And then it was papered over by taking the ARA, or the stimulus dollars, and spending those monies to close the hole. Well, as I told you, the stimulus dollars are gone. So there was a hole of $271 million. And that would have led to large-scale layoffs of thousands upon thousands of teachers around the state. The other day I appeared in Bridgeport, the first one of these that I did. In that town alone, it would have meant 270 teachers would have lost their job at a bare minimum. So we fully fund our educational cost-sharing grant at $1.9 billion. We refuse to balance the budget on the backs of property taxpayers. Specifically, we did not slash municipal aid. Now, I got to tell you, as I was a mayor for 14 years. During the time that I was mayor, I watched administration upon administration play the game of passing on obligations to local communities while pretending to have cut the state budget. You know and I know what that led to in most places: higher property taxes, a tax that I happen to believe is more regressive than just about any other tax that we can levy in the state. We vowed to protect the safety net. Although we cut spending by $800 million, and some of that does apply to what I would otherwise call the safety net, I think we did a good job in as surgical a way as possible making those reductions. And as I previously said, we fully funded our pension obligations. We did turn to revenue, and I did talk about shared sacrifice all along. So here are some statistics about Torrington. Your median household income is $52,746,000. Put it in perspective, that is approximately 10,000, about 11,000 higher than Bridgeport, where I was the other night. For your median income, the changes in revenue that we're talking about would represent approximately $500. Most of that, in many of the cases, represented by the loss of a deduction or a credit on your income tax for property taxes. That would break down on a weekly basis to $9.62, or on a daily basis to $1.37. On the other broader portion of what we are doing, some of which the largest other portion pertaining to sales tax, would represent, for that same median household income, an approximate sales tax additional cost of $46, or 88 cents per week, or 13 cents per day. I will also tell you that this budget does in fact include a tax credit, an earned income tax credit. So families with incomes of $40,000, actually slightly over $40,000 or less, would qualify for an earned income tax credit. For a family of four with an income of $40,000, that would represent approximately $1,700 in additional income. So although your median income is $52,000, the reality is for those portions of the people who are represented in this room whose family income is less than $40,000, there actually may be no tax increase or tax reduction.